I've done a lot of marriage counseling through the years. A lot of marriage counseling. A lot of crisis counseling. And one of the things that I do, sort of as a standard procedure, is I take people and I say, you have come into my office with rose-colored glasses. Have you ever heard that expression before? Anybody ever heard that? Rose-colored glasses? Okay, rose-colored glasses. For those of you who are uninitiated, maybe you're of a new generation and haven't heard rose-colored glasses, you're thinking everything is going to be just great. Everything is going to be wonderful. I have chosen the right person to spend my life with. I've chosen the right situation. This is exactly what God wants for me. I am going to have a wonderful, fantastic... Don't go shaking your head. That's what all of them say. Every one of them say that when they come in there and they sit down with me and they start to talk about their wedding plans. And then I pop their little bubble. I just make them miserable. You're in for trouble. You're in for heartache. You're in for sorrow. You're in for grief. Oh, I had one lady, I never will forget. She just was the most wonderful lady. She'd had a previous relationship that had been really, really painful, really difficult, and she decided that wasn't the way to go, so she divorced that guy, and she found this wonderful fellow. She brought him in to me, and she said, "Pastor, would you marry us?" I said, "Sure, but only if you listen to what I have to tell you. You're in for trouble." "Oh, Pastor, we think you are unnecessarily negative. Yes, we had difficulty before. Yes, we had difficulty in a previous relationship, but we're past all that now. I got the right guy now." I said, "Okay, but you have to listen. I don't care whether you agree with me or not. You have to listen." Okay, so they went through the thing, and at the end they said, "Yeah, we've listened. And what you have to say may apply to a lot of different people, but not to us, because we've got it together. I'm burying my very best friend." And about 6 months later, they came back over and they said, hadn't seen him in church or anything for a while. They came back over and they said, "Pastor, do you have any more copies of that material that you gave us back before we got married? We'd like to review some of that stuff." I said, "It sure took you long enough." I want to hold up a mirror in front of your face. This is an iPad here. That's not a mirror. I want to hold a mirror in front of you this morning. Look into it. Search your heart. I'm not here to condemn you. Last thing in the world I want to do is condemn you. But every person who has ever come into my office already knows in their own heart how far they will go, and when they will put the brakes on and say, "That's enough." Even when they have their rose-colored glasses on, they already know how much they're going to put up with. And I'll just ask them flat out, "What's your limit? What's your limit? How much will you put up with?" "Oh, this is great. This is wonderful." I said, "No, what happens if she runs up your credit cards and you can't afford to pay the bill?" "That's not going to happen." "Okay. Then something equally disastrous is going to happen." "What happens if he gets hit by a truck and he is going to sit in a bed totally paralyzed for the rest of his life? How are you going to handle that? What's going to happen if somebody gets addicted to drugs, painkillers, or alcohol, and they become a completely different person under those influences? What are you going to do?" What's going to be happening when you get a diagnosis of a disease, and one by one the doctors have to start clipping off parts of that diseased body and making you more and more disabled? What are you going to do? Take care of each other. I'm going to tell you a story, and it's not in the Bible. It's all pretend. If you're a creative person, you take this as a seed of an idea, you write a biblical-based novel, and I will let you have all the profits. All right? It's totally made up. It's totally fictitious. But I want to share it with you. And it's based on, or circled, the underneath foundation of it comes from the 19th chapter of Luke. All right? We found that the Bible that I'm using is the same translation as what's up on the screen, but they've updated it just a little bit. So Larry and I have decided we're going to use the iTablet, and we're going to read off of this so that it matches the words on the screen. All right. Luke 19, verse 1. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." And so he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. And all the people saw this and began to mutter, "He has gone to be a guest of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anyone out of anything, I'll pay back 4 times the amount." And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come into this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." Now you could say to yourself, that makes a perfectly good story all by itself. It's a great story. Only appears in the Gospel of Luke. Luke, if you understand, has some uniquenesses. Luke has some special sources. Luke depends a great deal on the testimony of Jesus' mother, Mary. If you go back to the early chapters of Luke, you'll see stories about where Mary saw the angel and heard the announcement, went to be with Elizabeth, and the story of Jesus in the temple. All those come from Luke because they were the story that Mary told. I'm going to pretend this morning that Mary told this story to Luke also. Okay? Because Mary knew Zacchaeus. Mary had known Zacchaeus his whole life. Mary knew Zacchaeus because Zacchaeus and Jesus were born about the same time and grew up in Nazareth together. Stop a second. You know I just said this is a totally made-up story. It starts now. Follow? These 2 boys were like 2 brothers that spent every minute of their lives together as they started to grow up. They never did quite fit in with the rest of the boys. It was almost like Jesus and Zacchaeus were the odd guys out. You know, everybody picked on them. They were always together, and because they were brothers, they really enjoyed being together. And they would hide out in different things because the bigger boys, the stronger boys, the older boys, were always picking on them, throwing rocks at them, making them the butt of jokes that they would pull and pranks that they would pull. They were always teasing because Jesus always was just a little odd, and his little friend Zacchaeus was just a little. Never was very big. Always spent time, being kicked around. You remember that 98-pound weakling they used to talk about, being on the beach and the bully would come in and kick sand in his face? Well, Zacchaeus never made 98 pounds. He always had sand in his face. And he hated it. And even though Jesus was his buddy, he wanted to be with the rest of the guys. Wanted to hang out with him, wanted to play the game, wanted to be a part of the bigger community. They just wouldn't let him. Just wouldn't let him. Humiliated him at every single moment. It was like they made a whole possession out of just making his life miserable. And finally, when he got to be just a little older, he would yell at him from a distance, far away, "I'll get even with you guys. I'll make you pay double for what you've done to me." But he didn't know how he was going to do that, of course. He wasn't big enough to beat him to death. And he couldn't find a stick long enough to hit him hard enough with. So he just seethed on the inside with this anger because it just wasn't fair what they did to him. "And I'll make you pay double for what you've done to me," was on his heart and on his mind as well as on his voice. And then one day, a guy came by and said, "Mr. Zacchaeus, I have an option for you. If you come and work for us as a Roman tax collector, you can make every one of those guys pay double for what they've done to you. We're going to make you the deputy tax collector for Nazareth. And then you can walk up and down the street and make them pay. And we will back you by the power of the Roman government, and we will make sure that they answer to you and you alone. You'll be the big man on campus for the first time in your life." Well, that was just too good to be true. That just sounded like an answer to prayer. Now he is made the tax collector for Nazareth. Now everybody who used to throw stones is beginning to say, "Please, Mr. Zacchaeus, be kind to us. Please, Mr. Zacchaeus, be gentle with us." Because you see, in the Roman world, there was no tax form. There was no 1040. Your tax bill was whatever the tax collector said your tax bill was. And if he didn't like you, your tax bill got bigger. And if he didn't want to give you a break, your tax bill got bigger. So it was good to be nice to Mr. Zacchaeus, because you might just otherwise regret the fact that you didn't give him proper respect. And everything was going fine. Zacchaeus started to walk around in a little nicer clothes and had a little stronger stun in his back. He could come down through the city streets and people would nod at him. May even bow just a little bit to him, saying, "Have a nice day, Mr. Zacchaeus." It was fun. Until see, the Romans, they don't play nice. All right? They want their tax money, and they want all of it. So they came to Zacchaeus, and they said, "Mr. Zacchaeus, you have a weak spot in your profession. If you really want to accomplish something, if you really want to become somebody, you're going to have to change the way you do things. Because if you want us to promote you, if you want us to give you a better position, a more responsible position, you're going to have to change your idea. Because right now, you're only being hard on those people that used to annoy you. And you're not putting pressure on the people you still call friends. We will know that you have finally become a first-class tax collector when we see that you've put just as much pressure or more on the people who are nice to you. In order to have what he wanted, to be able to make people pay back double for what they paid him in the abuse through the years, The Roman officers said, it's Joseph and Mary and that family of Jesus that you have to give them the hard time. And when we've seen that you've done it, and you've actually overcome this weakness that you have in your feelings, then we can work with you. And from that moment on, Zacchaeus turned on the only friends he'd ever had. The only ones who'd ever loved him and taken care of him. And he was merciless. Absolutely without an ounce of tenderness, compassion, or patience. Even to the point where he increased their tax load to the point where they couldn't afford to pay it, and he knew it. And he threatened to either put Joseph or Jesus, the oldest son, into a debtor's prison and make them work for the Roman government to pay off the tax bill, or completely crush the whole family. I don't know how long Jesus worked on the construction projects that the Romans were building. They were always building something. I don't know how hard and how hot the sun was. But Joseph couldn't do it. He was an old man. Jesus had to watch his father suffer so much because of what they were going through that he actually collapsed and died from the stress of what Zacchaeus was putting the family through. And it ruined them, totally ruined them. Zacchaeus had impressed his handlers in the Roman government. He was eligible for promotion. And over the next several years, there was just one step after another because of his passion to grab as much as he could possibly grab. They moved him from one bigger community to the next, one more wealthy community to the next, until finally they gave him the chief tax collector's position at the most profitable trade route in the entire area. See, Jericho sets down in the desert area down by the Dead Sea. It's a perfect path for those trading caravans coming from the east and from India and going up into Roman Greek area of the territories, and people who were buying and selling came back and forth through there. But in that desert region, you had to stop at the only places that had water. And Jericho was an oasis of beautiful, abundant fresh water. So in order to finally make it through the next step in the travel that you had to do out through the Negev desert, you had to stop and resupply in Jericho. And there was the Roman government taking a percentage of every single transaction. You need feed for your camels? Okay, a certain percentage of that went to the Roman tax collector. If you wanted water, a certain part of that went to the tax collector. If you wanted to trade some of your goods for supplies that you needed for your trip, a portion of that transaction went to the tax collector. He had the very best job in all of Israel to make money. And he made everybody pay double for what he had been through his whole life. And he was wealthy. And he was dressed immaculately. He had the finest robes. He had the biggest chariot. He had all of the luxuries of life. And he was feared as much as respected. Because if you crossed him, you were going to pay double. Everybody knew it. If you crossed him, you were going to pay double. And everybody knew it. Until one day, word came that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. And we know that entrance into Jerusalem is the triumphal entry. It's the beginning of the last week of Jesus' life. They didn't know it then, but that's what was happening. And Jesus was on his way. And word had come through the caravans and through the people traveling through the area, getting ready for Passover, that Jesus was on his way through Jericho and headed up the mountainside toward Jerusalem. And Luke records that this little man with the big ego had to find out whether or not Jesus might remember him. Couldn't see through the crowd. He was too small. If he'd gotten in the crowd, he might have been stepped on. So he figured out that if he climbed up in a tree, disguised by the leaves, he could look down on the crowd and see whether or not this was the same person that he had tormented so mercilessly back in Nazareth. He might even get a chance to see whether or not Jesus hated him. And as the crowds approached, as the crowds swarmed by, and Jesus was in the center of that whole mixture, suddenly everything stopped. The whole procession came to a halt. And Jesus glanced up into the tree limbs of the sycamore tree. And what did he say? Zacchaeus, you're going to pay double for what you did to me. Oops, I'm sorry, it doesn't say that. What does it say? Zacchaeus, I'd like to spend the afternoon at your house. Could you come down and we'll hang out together? I want to hold up a mirror in front of you. Has anyone hurt you as bad as I've described what Zacchaeus did to Jesus? Anyone ever hurt you that bad? Anybody betray you that bad? Anybody wound you that deeply? What did Jesus do? You see, he commanded us, I want you to love just like I've loved. I'm giving you this new command. Love as I have loved. We all set limits, don't we? I'll take it up to a certain point, and then I'm saying, I'm done. It's over. We see it in people's marriages. We see it in people's relationships. My friends, we see it in the church. Everybody puts on their rose-colored glasses and says the church ought to be this wonderful place that never has any conflict or any differences of opinion. Rose-colored glasses. Jesus didn't have rose-colored glasses. The Gospel of Matthew says, blessed are those who persecute you, who torment you, who put you in prison, who make your life miserable. Blessed are you. They've done the same thing to the prophets. And when he taught his disciples how to pray, part of the phrases were, forgive us our sins. You call them debts or trespasses. I don't care how you use your words. That's forgive those who have betrayed you when you needed them the most, in order to receive God's forgiveness for your own failures. And then he actually stops and describes it. Because if you don't forgive, then your Father in heaven can't forgive you. It becomes a block to God's grace. And I see people and I say, well, I put up with it for 15 years, and I'm not putting up with it for another day, you know. And then this is what they did to me, and this is what they said, and I'm going to make them pay double for what they did to me. I urge you to think about this for this morning, just for a moment. challenge your own heart. Challenge your own spirit. Have you set a limit so much lower than what Jesus Christ did himself that you were trying to protect yourself from any more harm and danger, any more torment? Have you set yourself so that you say, I've had it, I'm walking away from this thing and I'm never coming back? You've heard him say it, haven't you? But listen, Jesus said, I've shown you what I want you to do. I've given you the example of what I want you to be. And he walked with that little egomaniac, thief, that traitor to the entire Jewish nation, all the way down there to his big, elaborate, fancy home. Jesus didn't even have a place to lay down his head, not even a shack. And there he walked. And Zacchaeus understood that he was loved in spite of what he'd done, in spite of what he'd been. And the words came out of his mouth this way: I give half of my possessions to the poor, and I will pay back 4 times what I took from anybody. 4 times over what I took from anybody. You know what he did? In that moment, in that instant of time, he declared bankruptcy for the rest of his life. His entire life vanished in front of his eyes when he said, I will do this because I have been made a part of God's family once again. I want to share this with you because in less than 10 days, Jesus is going to go to a cross because one of his most faithful followers betray him to the Jewish and the Roman leaders. They beat him with 39 lashes. They spit in his face. They jerk out handfuls of his beard with their fists. They knock him around, put a crown of thorns on his head, smash it with an old cat o' nine tails until it jabs down into his scalp. They hand him across and they carry him up to Calvary and they nail him down to a piece of wood. And he hangs there for 3 hours until he dies. And even after he's dead, they poke into his body with a spear and pierce down through his lungs and his heart to drain every ounce of his life's blood out of his body. Kind of makes what Zacchaeus did seem simple, doesn't it? Kind of makes it seem almost trivial. And what were the words that he spoke from the cross? Father, forgive them. Father, you know this was all done so that they could see salvation today, just like Zacchaeus did. Those who abuse us, those who take advantage of us, those who persecute us, cannot see redemption and grace and forgiveness if we don't give it to them. If we decide to be self-protective, if we decide that we've had enough and we're going to get double what's been done to us, they will never see the open door into God's kingdom except through the very people they abuse the most. Don't you see, you are an agent of God's forgiveness into their lives. And don't expect them to smile and say, well, thank you very much. They're going to just fold up their fist and hit you again. That's the way sin works in people's lives. And Jesus said, that's okay. Turn the other one. Say, okay, give me another one over here. It's okay. No, please don't misunderstand. Don't become somebody's punching bag. But listen to what God's saying to us about love. Don't set the limit so much lower than what He has allowed, because we're afraid of not being able to protect our most vulnerable bodies and minds and hearts. Listen to what God's doing when He says, here, let me show you how to love.